Hello everyone. Come on down to the front. There are a lot of seats. I'm going to go ahead and start because we have a lot to talk about tonight. I'm Ann Blessing. I'm chair of the Board of Trustees of Historic Charleston Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. I would like to ask that you switch off your cell phones as I tell you more about the program. As you all know, the development of the Union Pier Terminal is the largest development project in the history of Charleston. We have been designated the #1 city in the world for years. So people around the world are paying attention to how we make the most of this opportunity. We are famous for protecting what makes our city special and inspiring others. And now we must continue as careful, thoughtful stewards of the last undeveloped 65 acres of our valuable and historic waterfront. Charleston is exceptional. And if our city is to be expanded at this scale, we need an exceptional plan that is not rushed. The challenges are great, so great that the 3 organizations represented on this panel have banded together as a coalition. Although we have worked together on various issues in the past, this coalition is unprecedented. As we wade through the zoning and the city processes, and the acronyms, the many acronyms, the PUDs, the TIFs, the MIDs, the TRC, GIS, they keep coming. Our groups, also known as CCL, PSC, and HCF, have pooled resources, consulted experts, written letters and op-eds, held discussions with the city, the port, the developer, the neighborhoods, and convened the community at events like this one. Historic Charleston Foundation is proud to stand with the Coastal Conservation League and the Preservation Society of Charleston as we work together to make this a better plan for Charleston. And we are so glad you are here tonight because we need your help. Tonight's panel consists of the executive directors of our 3 organizations, and it will be moderated by Vince Graham, my friend and fellow board member, who is internationally recognized for his innovative and successful developments, including local neighborhoods, Ion, Morris Square, Mixon, Earls Court, and Catfiddle Street. Vince specializes in human-scaled urbanism, and he is an endless source of creativity, combining historical precedent and modern principles and techniques while respecting context and scale. Vince will introduce our panelists, and he and each one will give a brief presentation, which will last about 20 minutes and include slides. Following this, Vince will pose questions to our panelists for about 40 minutes. Thank you to audience members who pre-submitted questions, which Vince used to formulate his questions. The bulk of these questions were about height, density, and compatibility. Following this portion of the program, there will be an opportunity for live questions. If you have a question, please be brief so we can allow for others. There are a few ideas we want you to leave with tonight. The first is that the low plan is not the only way to develop this property. The master plan as submitted does not reflect what Charleston deserves. There are many alternatives, and our panelists will share various ideas with you. The second concept is that the city has ample power to press for a solution that fits the needs of the community and the city. We can achieve success for everyone involved, including the port, with a thoughtful, visionary, inclusive process that is driven not by what the developers need, but what the city of Charleston needs. I'd like to thank the members of the Planning Commission, city council members, or other elected officials who are here tonight. Are there any here? If so, can you raise your hand? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so what we need is for you to share this message with them. There were a few who told us ahead of time that they had conflicts, but Charlestonians please tell them this. Charlestonians have put their trust in you to protect the integrity and legacy of this city and to be thoughtful about the impact of this project on future residents and taxpayers. We are counting on you, our politicians. And we are counting on everyone in this room. As you leave tonight, please take our handout, which details what you can do. We are asking each and every one of you to contact your city council member wherever you live. On behalf of the coalition, I thank you for your attendance and support. We hope you enjoy the panel and we ask for your help as we find a better way forward for Union Pier. And now I'll call on Vince Graham.
It is my honor to moderate a discussion among three thoughtful stewards who care deeply about this place, about the place in general, but especially about our place. I thought I'm going to have a few slides here to talk about context, to put Union Pier in context of the larger city, because context is very important. This at the upper left is the model of the old walled city that's in the lobby of the Historic Charleston Foundation, and a map of that same area on the lower right. So this area comprises 62 acres. I do, okay. That'll be helpful to, thank you, Cassia, everyone. As I was saying, this model at the upper left is in the lobby of the Historic Charleston Foundation. It's a model of the old walled city, and it comprises an area comprised of about 62 acres, roughly between Meeting and East Bay to the west and east, and then Water Street to the south up to Cumberland Street on the north. I thought it would be interesting to share with y'all what exists on that 62 acres today. There are 720 homes of all shapes and sizes. There's about 800,000 square feet of commercial space. There are a number of different civic uses, including 6 museums, 5 churches, 6 cemeteries, 2 performing arts theaters, a city hall, and a 450-student school. So this kernel can be said to comprise the urban DNA of Charleston. And this is what, in large part, I feel like makes Charleston the world's greatest city, so-called. It's a beautiful place of vibrant density in which people live. They love to visit. They work here. They go to religious services here. They attend concerts here. And it has been this way. It's an amazing, resilient place. It's lasted for hundreds of years. If you did an analysis on the value of just the commercial and the residential property, it would exceed $1.5 billion on this 62 acres. So it's very valuable economically, and it's hard to put a price on the civic uses and the public realm that's here. But that's roughly what the slightly smaller than Union Pier. Here it is, outlined, old walled city. And I thought it would be interesting to look at it in the context of other cities, like this is Rome. This is the section of Rome that includes the Pantheon and the Piazza Navona. Much more dense, but still at a human scale, 4 to 5 stories, versus Charleston's, the old walled city, which is roughly 3 stories. My feeling is that if buildings are beautiful, then density compounds that beauty. The converse is true. If buildings are ugly, then density is going to compound that ugliness. And so what we want is beautiful buildings of a human scale. Here it is overlaid on Union Pier, the Union Pier site. Now, let me catch up here. I've got 2 screens running, so excuse me. I feel like there's a lot to like about the plan. The connectivity, there's some nuances. We're going to talk a lot about how it might be improved, but it has a connected network of streets and relatively small blocks. It provides additional access, public access to the waterfront. And along with that, one of the things I think it does is that after a long, long time, it will put this land to a higher and better use, or it could potentially, it has that potential to do that. When the container, with the advent of the container after World War II, it changed the shipping logistics, just revolutionized shipping. And in places like New York, you may have seen these old photos of New York with the shipping infrastructure around the tip of Manhattan or in Brooklyn. Well, with the advent of the shipping container, all that went to New Jersey, and the shoreline, the waterfront was redeveloped. Same thing happened in San Francisco. It went to Oakland. In Portland, it went to Seattle. And even in Savannah, they moved the infrastructure upriver to Garden City, and began to redevelop the south side. But for whatever reason, we kept a good part of our infrastructure, shipping infrastructure, in the city and on the peninsula. Now, we have a bit of concern about values and scale, as has been mentioned and I've mentioned, the human scale, and we're a bit concerned about that maybe Lowe or the Ports Authority may not understand what we mean by that. So here are examples of scale that are not Charleston. The Carnival Cruise Line ships, you see it with the city in the background. The new Lowe headquarters on the Wando Welch in the upper right. And the port sold their old headquarters to build the Cooper, which you see in the lower left, for $39 million in 2017, and built this new headquarters on the Wando Welch terminal for $35 or $36 million. And so Lowe is building that, and then Lowe is also, this is their resort hotel on the Isle of Palms. So when they present a plan that's arguably kind of somewhat vague, if not, it may be intentionally made vague, but it gives us concern. We would like some greater specificity so we understand where they're coming from. And this is another example of what's not Charleston scale. Recently, with the help of the Coastal Conservation League, actually it wasn't so recent, but years and years ago, on St. Helena Island, a vision and plan was put in place on St. Helena to protect the culture of that place. And recently, a developer has come onto St. Helena on a beautiful piece of property, Pine Island Plantation, and wanted to do a gated community and a golf course, and that was not consistent with the vision that was put together in the late 90s with the help of the Coastal Conservation League and others. And so by virtue of the fact that they had a clear vision and a clear plan, the governor actually intervened on the side of those who wanted to preserve the culture of the place. And that's a challenge we have here because the Union Pier and the Columbus Street terminal to the north, they've not been included in Charleston, the peninsula's comprehensive plan. It's just kind of a whole. So we want to, that gives us concern. And just a few photographs, and I know Winslow will talk more about this, but this is what we see as Charleston scale. These are all pictures in the original walled city, pictures of buildings in the walled city. An example of how to govern scale is, I took this with, and mentioned that I've been involved in the development of ION. One way we control scale is with governing widths of lots, maximum width and maximum building coverage. So it's an effective and simple way that people understand how to govern scale of places. And finally, I'll leave you with this slide. This is a quote from Alcaeus, who was a poet of ancient Greece. Not houses finely roofed, not the stones of walls well built, nor canals nor dockyards make the city, but men able to use their opportunity. And rather than just reserve sites for big institutionalized national developers to come in and build big boxes, why don't we create the opportunity for other people to get involved? Maybe don't have quite the resources, these big institutional investors, but let's enable opportunity here locally. So with that, our Panelists tonight, Winslow Hasty, is President and CEO of the Historic Charleston Foundation. Faith Rivers James is Executive Director of the Coastal Conservation League, and Brian Turner is President and CEO of the Preservation Society of Charleston. So Winslow, I'll turn it to you.
All right. Thank you, Vince. I will not be nearly as prosaic as Vince, and that's a tough act to follow, but thank you very much. Let me get situated here. Sorry, we do have multiple things going on, so I'm going to have to really focus here. Okay, and is it this? How do I advance? There, okay, back. Okay, all right, I've got one in each hand. Sorry. Okay, good evening. There are two major points I'd like you all to take home with you this evening. But before I get into that, I'd like to share a quick history lesson. This simple graphic encapsulates over 20 years of urban planning wisdom that Charleston has been following, unfortunately, until recently. This wisdom has asserted that height and density need to be concentrated along the center spine of the peninsula, mostly between King and Meeting Streets north of Calhoun. The reasoning behind this brilliant concept was that we needed to respect view sheds out to the water and allow our city's beautiful skyline to remain unimpeded. This edict was first codified in the 1999 downtown plan. Unfortunately, this sacrosanct rule has been violated in a few places recently, including at West Edge and Morrison Yard, which are very egregious examples of that. And now the Union Pier development is attempting to violate it further down the peninsula. And for us, that is a huge problem. So, the first myth that I'd like to debunk is that all the marketing language and pretty renderings that we've been seeing from the port's developer, Lowe, is going to translate into a beautiful new neighborhood that is a natural extension of the city. At the moment, this is most definitely not the case. An assemblage of block-sized buildings that are 6 and 7 stories tall, on top of 12 feet of fill, is not going to blend into the character of our famed downtown. The actual language in the rezoning application, which we refer to lovingly as the PUD, that is going before Planning Commission and City Council, is what's going to rule the day. This is what establishes the property rights for this massive development, not watercolors. I implore this audience, as well as the planning commissioners and council members, to ask hard questions and challenge what's being presented, because our city deserves that level of responsible due diligence, especially for a project of this magnitude. These are the phrases that Lowe has been using to describe their proposal in marketing materials and advertising. But unfortunately, their master plan does not reflect this at all. We have been challenging the scale issue for months, with zero traction and zero concessions to settle our concern. In fact, the only concession that has been made to date, a linear plaza connecting the Bennett Rice Mill to the water, which sort of just makes sense, was not a concession at all because they had miscalculated their open space requirements. The following images that I'm going to share, including this one, are very realistic renderings that we commissioned, revealing what Lowe's proposal would actually look like from above Ansonboro looking out to the water. As you can see, the new development dwarfs anything in the foreground. This next view shows the southern half of the development from the water, without a cruise ship, mind you. Again, dwarfing the Customs House, which is the building all the way to the left there that you probably recognize, and certainly blocking views into the city. The second myth is that this plan is fully baked and inevitable, and we're just going to have to accept it. We cannot think like this. This is Charleston, and too many people have worked so hard over too many generations to protect this incredible city, and we absolutely cannot let them down. There is a better way. We just have to be vigilant. This iconic streetscape is representative of what we all love about Charleston and what makes it an internationally beloved destination and economic powerhouse. Note the modulation in height, roof form, and material. These elements must be written into Lowe's PUD document, but unfortunately they refuse to include any specifics around these issues. Because if these guidelines are not in the zoning controls, then we will absolutely end up with bad architecture, bad urban design, and an incompatible waterfront district that will detract from the rest of the city. And I know that might sound alarmist, but I'm not being alarmist. This is happening all over the city as we speak. Here's the famed monstrosity at 295 Calhoun, which has been litigated numerous times. This is roughly the size and scale of the development that Lowe's plan will deliver as it stands today. Here's another beauty that sits across the street from the baseball stadium, again at the scale that Lowe is presenting in their plan. The sad reality is that these are the kind of buildings that institutional investors are delivering today in Charleston, and we need to safeguard against this at Union Pier by having specific zoning language that prevents it. So I'm going to wrap up by sharing two contrasting images. The first is a gauzy watercolor commissioned by Lowe, which is a view of their original proposal for the Cooper Hotel, which Vince was talking about, which is, of course, right next to Waterfront Park. This second, more detailed rendering is what is actually being constructed, which is much larger and less architecturally interesting than what was originally proposed. They first showed, just to go back, they first showed gabled and hipped roof forms, a wonderful green roof, which is, always lovely. And again, at 4 to 5 stories, 4 stories on this end, 5 on this end. Then, through the review process, what we ultimately get is a flat-roofed, 6-story building that dominates the waterfront. And frankly, this view here is the best view of the building, unfortunately. I think the Cooper Hotel is a good indication of where we're heading with Union Pier. So I hope you'll agree with me that focus and vigilance from the entire community are going to have to rule the day. So please help us. There we go.
Well, good evening, everyone. That indeed is a tough act to follow. Those images are really, really disturbing. So I'm Faith Rivers James, and I head up the Coastal Conservation League. It is a privilege to work with so many people who are dedicated to preserving our coast. And at the heart of that coast is our beloved city of Charleston. And this proposal strikes at the heart of Charleston. So what I'd like to do today is just talk about some of the main priorities that we have been focusing on. Oops, hold on. There we go, great, thank you. All right, so we have 4 priority areas that we have been focused on. First, of course, is cruise, and everyone in this room has probably been involved with us in this journey. We worked very hard we all worked together to stop this from being the place where folks can get on and off of their cruise ships. But we still have ongoing concerns, right? Now, Charleston will be a place that is a port of call. That means our visitors are going to arrive on foot instead of in cars, and thus they don't need the big parking lot at Union Pier. But we also have to consider when these port of call visits come, these ships will be idling in our harbor for extended periods of time. And so we're very concerned about diesel emissions coming from these diesel cruise ships. And so we want to be sure that we have a different alternative, a better Union Pier. With this redevelopment, they have the opportunity to assure us to put in place an infrastructure for shore power so that we can run these ships while they're in our harbor via electricity instead of letting them idle with the diesel fuel. And so they have said that they are committed to reviewing, to examining shore power. We would like a commitment. We need a substation so that we are assured that as we go forward, ships will be able to utilize shore power. It is not that far reach to ask for our ships to be at least incentivized to use shore power. Ports are doing it all over the world. And right now in Florida, they are working on shore power in one of the cruise ship terminals that has 8 cruise ships. So we think it's certainly doable, and we continue to encourage the port and LOW to include the requirement that these ships plug up instead of running diesel while they're here on port of call visits. The second issue, let's see, we'll go back a little bit. Second issue is green space. And Wenzel mentioned this in his comments. Our challenge with the green space is that, we just want them to apply the same rules as everyone else. If any one of us wanted to do a development, they would say to us, in exchange for new zoning rules for your PUD, we want to see 20% of that reserved as open space. Of course, the policy behind this is to ensure that we're not packed up with such densely populated sites. 20% needs to be open space, and a quarter of that needs to be usable open space so that we, the public, or at least the residents, would be able to use this space. We have been working with them, with the city and with LOW, to point out that anything that's forward of the critical line actually belongs to the citizens of South Carolina because it's held in public trust. And so you can't really give it to us again and call it open space. So one of our main issues, one of our main goals is to have them count the open space properly. So at this point, they've been instructed by the city that the usable open space has to be behind the critical line. Where that critical line falls is a very interesting question. In my old life, I was a property professor. I won't bore you with those details, but I will tell you that that critical line piece, particularly over to the right side of your screen in front of the customs house, is in a very precarious situation. And the way that they are counting it up leaves something to be desired. But let's not forget, we need a quarter of that open space to be usable, but the 20%, they are telling us, oh, we have 22 acres of open space. It's 22 acres of open space over the water. And the last time I checked, water is not dirt. So we continue to work with them to assure that while we are thrilled with the prospect of uncovering parts of this space, to be able to restore some living shorelines, and we stand ready to work with them on that in every regard, counting the purple spots that you see, the blue spots that you see, marsh and water that are in the public trust, we don't think can be counted as open space. And so we continue to hold firm on that. Third point, connectivity. And as Vince mentioned, connectivity is very important. We need a streetscape. Right now we can't get back there. Decades ago when I was a young law clerk at Sinclair Boyd, I had to park back there and we'd work our way around, and it was always sort of a maze to get back there. But now the prospect of opening these streets is important. But we also need to focus on how people are going to use it. And so we are very focused on ensuring that they have some blockades, some things that will slow down the traffic so that we can safely traverse all the intersections on this site. It is important for cyclists to have facilities on this site, and for all of us, regardless of age or ability, to be able to get across and get around the site. So we are really focusing on helping them slow down the traffic and then make plans to integrate with some form of transit, because when you have 1,600 units, that equates to 4,000 new residents living on Union Pier. I don't know how that's going to improve traffic, but it is certainly something we need to take account of. We have to make accommodations for these everyday trips to the grocery store and all these things. If we can put some of that on bike and by foot and by ferry, all the better. So we are focusing on that because it really allows all of us to reduce our carbon footprint. And there's also an access issue here. It is important to recognize that wherever they do put those parking garages, I would imagine they're going to be expensive. We don't want this site to be limited to folks who can afford high-priced parking all the time. This is supposed to be a park that is available for all the citizens of Charleston, and we want to make sure that they do make that available. And last but not least, they have promised us that they will put a recreational children's park on the island piece. Well, to get from Washington Street back to the island park is going to be a big attractor for kids. We need to not only make sure we have bike lanes for cyclists getting back and forth to work, we need spaces for children to run from the street back to the park without them being in danger. As you can imagine, we're going to have not just adult cyclists, we're going to have kids taking their bikes over from Charlestown and from the east side, and buses bringing loads of kids for games, and that needs to be a safe access for all of our kids. And then, of course, we have to deal with flooding and resilience. Now, we know that this space floods. It does it on a regular basis. And now we need to figure out how we can take our planning for flooding into account as we deal with this space. Now, they have told us, and these are just renderings from their work, from the public hearing, they've told us that they're going to give us some innovative solutions to deal with stormwater. They're going to put in some big pipes to help Anson Borough drain out into the harbor directly. We'd love to see the details on that engineering. They have said that they'd love to commit to green infrastructure to help, like the green roof gardens that Winslow just showed us. But our challenge is, when you look in the details of the PUD, it always says that the green infrastructure is optional. If it was optional on the Cooper, we see how that turned out, right? So it is important that we focus on how we set up this infrastructure and have the ability to have a long-term management plan. So they're also telling us, well, let me go back one slide. If we go back here, they say that's the current situation, right? That Washington Street is circled there in red for you, and we have flooding that comes on board now. This is how they plan to deal with the resilience issues, right? Washington Street, the red circle, is the base. Well, they're going to plan to build up. They're going to build up in the middle, and hopefully we'll get those optional bioswales and green pieces, but they're going to build this city on a hill. And it's not going to shine. It is going to, I fear, rain down on Washington Street. As you can see, the tiers of that cake, they are promising us that they can take the water out to the harbor at each level. And they can, at the yellow circle, they tell us they can underground store that water as it rolls back down the hill towards our city. If that underground storage doesn't work, we know what's going to happen. And so we would like to have faith that their plan will work. But we'd like to, as Ronald Reagan used to say, you have trust, but we'd like to verify. Our challenge is that at this stage in the process, they are not required to give us the details on the engineering. And they are telling us, oh, that will come at the concept stage. It will come at the site plan stage. But they're asking for zoning rights right now. And so that's why you hear us talk about pausing this PUD, so that we get the information that our leaders need to make informed decisions. Right? And then, of course, what's the plan to maintain it? It is vitally important that we understand the finances that will be required to establish and maintain this site. They're telling us that the tax increment financing structure will enable them to handle all of this infrastructure into the future. One, we don't know the details of that TIF, 2, we don't know that the county or school district have committed to that TIF. And 3, wouldn't it be nice if we could all take our homeowners association dues, reinvest it in our own neighborhoods, and then not pay taxes? This site is going to have needs. They're going to need to pay taxes. They're going to require fire, police, all sorts of protection. And we don't know if the TIF that they propose will produce the funds that they say, or that it will be sufficient for us to move forward into the future and maintain the infrastructure. And so those are our primary concerns, and we think we can, working together, get them to do better on crews with shore power, do better on open space by only counting dirt and land, help us with connectivity by assuring us that we will all be able to traverse this site safely. And then finally, with flooding and resilience, give us the details before you ask for these zoning rights and show us how we're going to pay for it so that we, the taxpayers, don't end up on the hook for this at the end of the day. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you. Thank you, Faith. Well, Faith was actually my law professor back in the day, and I continue to learn from her. I particularly like her one-liners, and one that you've used lately to sum it all up is put it in the PUD. I think that's clearly the need that we have as a community right now, is to get more transparency and detail on what is actually being proposed. So, okay, whoops. Oh boy. Okay, well, my name is Brian Turner with the Preservation Society, and I'm just so grateful to be here tonight. And I'm looking forward to a robust discussion, so I want to be fairly brief. I want to touch just quickly on process, and then to show some of the power of technology, I think, that we're using in our advocacy to really show people both what is being proposed and really a true story of what's being proposed, but also what's possible. And I think technology is actually going to be one of these components that helps us in the future envision what can be the right site here. This is confusing, Winslow. Okay. So here's where we're starting in this community conversation that for all intents and purposes is going to move forward to a Planning Commission hearing on June 7th. And this is the land use map that we're dealing with. And as I've been reminded, any private property owner is free to request a change in use for their property. That's the right of any owner. And really the question is how prepared the city is with its planning documents based on the scale of those changes and whether they're consistent. And consistency with our planning authorities is really the governing issue here. So what we obviously have, and I think we're all concerned about, is that we had a limited public input from a few meetings that were held by the developer, with the input going to a developer and not transparently to a city in a city process. And pumping out a plan that appears by all measures to maximize land value. And that's really by providing that maximum flexibility. And I think both of my colleagues before me, I don't need to repeat, have articulated that flexibility does maximize that value. It attracts the capital markets to build as big and potentially as cheap as they want to. And that's not good for Charleston. So what do we have now in our planning books that can counsel us as to how to manage this process? Well, in some ways, we have some good authorities to rely on. And I hope that everybody, as you get ready for your maybe minute comment that you're going to be able to deliver at the Planning Commission, I hope you all will use your voice. We can remind them that we removed Union Pier in the latest comprehensive plan from its previous designation as urban core to a future land use area to give us some negotiating room to say, maybe this isn't appropriate for urban core. And we have a new designation called city centers, which has a really critical addition to it, which is that city centers should be on high ground. So one of the fundamental questions here is, should you be able to just build the high ground so you can have a city center? And I think that's really fundamentally what the governing authorities in Charleston are going to be grappling with here. The other thing is, I think Winslow alluded to, we have a downtown plan that counsels us to do new construction that's fine grain and small scale and consistent with our character, to develop near the spine. And then third, we have the Upper Peninsula District and Upper King, where we're seeing big buildings. And in a way, these areas are intended to be pressure valves to take pressure off the historic district, really our most cherished asset. And as you look at the planning map of Charleston, you can see that Union Pier is entirely surrounded by the historic district. It's within the old city district. So that needs to be part of the conversation. This is a very sensitive piece of land, and for us to pass a plan that provides that maximum flexibility without getting into the details, I think could open the door for something really alarming. And we all, as organizations, have a right to be concerned, and I'm just so grateful that we're leveraging our impact collectively. So now I'm just going to talk about some of the images you've all seen in the press, and I think that these, well, actually not in the press, mostly in our communications. I think this is basically a snapshot from a GIS model similar to Google Maps. You can walk around, and we color-coded the existing context in Ansonboro, a focus on Ansonboro here, with what's proposed. And this is generous to low because it essentially replicates the watercolor version of what they've proposed. And I think that these images were persuasive in convincing the National Trust for Historic Preservation, whom I previously worked for, to list the site on its 11 most endangered places in America last week. This, I think, is a powerful storytelling image, similar to the one Winslow showed, where watercolors are illusory. Art is beautiful, but reality is important to get right when we're planning the next generation of Charleston. And here's another image. You can see, I think, how watercolors can sort of obscure. I mean, pastels have an ability to kind of obscure what the reality could be, especially of scale and mass. So now I just want to, and I hope to have a lot more. Let me just preface what I'm going to show next with, I hope we have a lot more community conversation about it, because as you all have probably been wondering, as we have too, when you're in a process that doesn't allow for community input in a planning process, but is really reactive to a plan that you're seeing, how do you frame a potential alternative, and what is incumbent on an advocacy organization to do when you don't have all the specs for the flooding, stormwater mitigation, and all those proprietary details? And so what we've done is, I want to caveat this a million different ways, not to say that we have the answer, but we have an answer, and using the power of technology, I think we can envision something different. And so here's the height map and basically the land use map that we have in the current PUD. And here's the exercise that we did with a very talented landscape designer named Thomas Woltz with the Nelson Bird Woltz team, who, after some conversations, we decided to see what it would look like if we built a resilience park to allow for a lot more open space in the upland, and how we characterize open space as three specific functions and purposes. One, for ecology and to allow some breathing room into the site. Two, with the Bennett Rice Mill Mall that would allow for commemoration of what that structure was for and how it connected Charleston to the world and the legacy of slavery in the city. And then third, I know it's hard to make out, you'll see in the next rendering, a space for recreation. And Faith mentioned that has previously been proposed on a space that basically has to be held in the public trust regardless. So we want to pull open space inland, and we want to reduce heights. So you can see a fairly aggressive move, but honestly, because of what Winslow was saying about how we how we are tapering down to the edge, why we feel like that sort of bolder move here is justified on this piece of land, particularly given its ecological history on former marshlands. And here's what we get. Taking this to this. And then, as we know, art has a powerful way to look at it from this perspective. And again, I think that I want to also say that we have not addressed the urban form. These are just buildings that are cut off at the bottom, but these are still Lowe's buildings. And we still have some vibrancy in this neighborhood, but we also are able to incorporate more civic values into it. And so again, this is one idea. I know there are many more out there, and I've seen them, and people have talked about them with all of us. And we would really, I think, an initial and an important victory for us would be to open this up to a community-led vision prior to considering this PUD, to have the city have a community-led planning process to amend its comprehensive plan in advance of voting on this very consequential application. One thing we're doing as an organization to prepare for the Planning Commission hearing on the 7th is to hear from people through a survey. Again, we represent a big part of the community. We're probably going to have the same minute that everybody else does. So we're asking people to fill out a survey and tell us what your values are and what the things we should be emphasizing. And I appreciate being here. I'm excited for the conversation. So, thank you.